we're back for part 2 with Christian here and dealing with systems, simple, complex, pretty much anything that interacts with itself on this planet. That's what we want to dive into, philosophical and technical approach. Mm-hmm. So do you want to carry on with your train of thought about these real-world examples?
Yeah, so we're talking about real-world examples of cultural or social change from small groups of people that there's a sort of tipping point, and how there's not always good outcomes. And I can think of countries that have, gone from one course, Venezuela, for example. Like, I'm not an expert in all geopolitics, but I know that when I was in high school and I was going to study abroad, we had students going there, and it was, at the time, it was one of the most prosperous and, stable countries to go to. And then I look at what's happening now, and that is for, reasons beyond my expertise, but it's changed.
Yeah.
Right. And so what we're trying to say is, what is like the critical mass of people to have a positive change and to be able to change culture, to have better, deeper, longer term, more equitable values?
Yeah. Because we have 7.5 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, if you've seen in systems, is there a threshold? Because people think herd immunity. They're always like, 80%. If we can get 80% vaccinated, we're good. Mm-hmm. Does that system sort of have the same application? Is there a percentage threshold for a system that you've seen before one entity within the organization actually starts to well off and then just really control, be the biggest cog in the wheel?
I go back to, it depends on the model.
Okay.
It depends on the model and what did we construct, right? So what is changing and what is numerically that threshold? What are we measuring, right? We constructed some set of variables to measure.
Well, let's use decentralization. I think that'd be a great example.
Sure. Yeah.
And what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. And if you want to speak to that, maybe our financial systems and stuff like that.
So with decentralization, do you mean of like financial decentralization or just kind of?
Well, I mean, I think you're seeing it. I think your brother's a perfect example of decentralization at play. And then COVID was a huge catalyst for decentralization.
And then cryptocurrency decentralization.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm talking about old systems seeing that they're fragile now because of decentralization.
So here's one. So one interest that I have in my research is, one of the observations with the traditional organization is less hierarchical in terms of control and command. And there's like a couple ways that decentralization is informally playing out, I think, in organizations. Is one, there's geographic, right? So I'm a remote employee.
Actual physical positioning.
Physical position, right? But the effect of that too is decisions are being made at different times and who is interacting. Yeah, we're asynchronous. And so we have kind of different set of information now being used to make, collective decisions within organizations. And I think a good example is when companies are able to do this well. They're able to actually operate asynchronously because to me, that means they have a pretty robust flow of information and they have a pretty strong internal culture to guide those decisions versus where everyone has to get into a room and there has to be consensus with everyone before we can move forward. I think that's unhealthy and it's actually too slow.
Yeah, where you could say, fuck everybody else's morals. Everyone's going to run by mine.
Right.
And then from that's how the decisions are made.
Right.
Right.
Or the other possibility there is we all have to be on the same page before we can move forward. Mm-hmm. And then what that does is it actually extends the time to consensus, extends the time to be able to move forward.
Well, that's the democratic approach, which is naturally built to be slow.
Right.
So what you're stating is let's take the beehive approach where we all know what the mission is. Protect the queen and honey.
Right.
Right? That's the end goal. So I don't care what flower you go to, what time of day you do it. We just know at the end of the day, this is where we want to be. Mm-hmm. And the be moral, whatever it might be, will guide us to that processing, and we can then act efficiently towards having that end result.
And so this is where I think leaders really benefit from developing an understanding of complex system and setting what's that goal? What's the bee and honey of our group here,
yeah.
right?
I like this.
What's the bee and honey? Or, what's the queen and honey? Because if you're trusting everybody to be operating quickly and efficiently and making independent, smaller decisions, then you got to make sure real clear what's the outcome we're going after, and make sure that outcome doesn't have a whole lot of really divergent negative paths along the way.
Oh, we made a lot of money. What happened? Oh, I had to kill 30,000 people.
Right.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, you did. That's not what we want to do to get to our end goal.
In the opioid crisis here in America.
Correct.
Right.
And it's so. Let's continue with the bee example. And I know Jason wanted to talk about this. Do systems thinkers or yourself look to nature for the designing and the testing and retesting of systems or models as you come up with?
Yeah. Yes. So biology, physics are some of the sort of, I would say, foundational scientific domains of which many models can then be applied to other problems.
How so?
So this is one of the things that I find the field of complex systems so fascinating is it's like interdisciplinary by nature, and kind of embedded within the field is taking a model that works in one domain, constructing variables that kind of interact in the same way in a different domain, and then running that model and seeing what happens, right? So
use something very simple.
So one that's classic is ants and leaving the pheromones to go and right. So ants,
I know where to go.
So ants will leave a trail of pheromones to the food that they find, and then they go back, and that indicates to the other ants where to go to find the food, right? And so they kind of help each other through this interesting system, leaving pheromones, and they actually have this collective outcome of feeding themselves, right? Bees are another, how honeybees coordinate is another one. And then just in our own bodies, right? So a biological system has regulation, right, to control the sort of outcomes, right, that can happen, right? That's in DNA, genetics, all of this stuff can take this sort of either from a philosophical angle or actually look at the model and apply variables and the interactions to find them, and then run the model in a different domain and see what the outcomes are.
But because I think looking at nature and what is compared to what I'm viewing it as is with my bias, because a philosophical approach, even though it could work, now you're creating a bias. Whereas if you're looking at nature and seeing a system that's in place, it's been in place for a long time, that's what it is.
Yeah. And nature's very respective of life. Nature doesn't want to kill life because it is life. So wouldn't that be the one thing you'd want to champion and follow after? I mean, it's what's designed you.
I think humanity would benefit a lot from getting back to nature.
Yeah.
But I mean, even the Bayesian, we had a whole podcast on that. Like that can be false.
Well, yeah, and I'll give an easy example. They talk about the coin toss as an example. Heads or tails. But what happens in the event you flip the coin and it lands on its side? The model freaking blows up. Then you're like, what happened to my reality? I thought it was just binary, this side or this side.
Throw out the data point.
Yeah. And then we're like, wait a minute, there's something in between both these data points? Like, what am I supposed to do? And I find that awfully interesting. I was looking to nature to solve a specific problem, right? If I have a lattice structure, think about, thing people grow roses on. And I want to search efficiently across that. That's a two-dimensional plane, right? And so I'm like, okay, what's the most efficient way to look for certain things first? Where do I start to look in a very large lattice? And I was like, well, how does nature do it? And I haven't found the solve yet, but this is how I've been, sort of thinking about things. Think about penguins. So a mother has her baby penguins, and they blast off for a bit, okay? And when they come back to return to the mother after they've done their first round of feeding with the collective group, they come back in and there's millions of penguins on this one island. how do they know where to search efficiently first? They always do. There's a specific call across this essentially a 3-dimensional lattice structure of where they should search. And they can direct themselves efficiently there. But we have problems with our current systems approach and analysis where it's like we try to take a 3-dimensional world, 3-dimensional problems, and force them into 2-dimensional analysis. It's like up or down, right? But there's so many vectors that cause specific behaviors, even within nature, to do specific things, even to cross boundaries that you wouldn't understand. For instance, if I want to analyze the forest, and Jason talked about pioneers off air. Well, if I walked into the forest and if the forest floor was radiated from old nuclear testing or something that may be going on, I can't see that, right? And I can't see what's going on underneath the soil. So what I'm really viewing is this 2-dimensional flat area and an interaction of all these points, these plants that sit on 2 dimensions. But I never considered the systems that were happening in a dimension underneath the one that was occurring right in front of me. And I didn't know how to look there. So how do we continue to look to nature and take this 3-dimensional approach of solving and move away from the 2-dimensional polarizing world that sticks us in buckets and says this thing is this or that, but there can't be a flexibility or the nuances of an entity in between that can actually move throughout dimensions?
I think that comes down to creative problem solving, conceptual blockbusting, interacting with diverse perspectives, like listening to what others are coming with. That's what it comes down to. Basically diversity of thought and open mind and creative problem solving is how to sort through these really complicated, complex problems.
So
do you have like a real world example of something that you've worked on in the past or something that you've researched that you saw a breakthrough because of this?
Let me think.
I've just done so many. I can't really pinpoint one.
Well, I mean, we had, we had the guest earlier was talking about
David Weinberger
about AI picking out people of color with facial recognition,
racial bias.
So then they brought in people of color, and then these data scientists began to ask them questions and began to understand their culture, and then they began to make changes in the systems from that
because they we're open now to a diversity of thought.
Yeah. So I remember I worked on one problem that I think this is more of just seeing bias and then being opened to observing and recognizing that it was there.
Let's talk about it.
So there was a problem I worked on a while ago now, but it kind of stuck with me. This was in an insurance domain, and what was going on there was they're using aerial images to try and assess the value of a home and whether or not they would, it fit within their risk profile, basically. And what they found was they just kind of had an AI system they trained it, and none of the homes with a chain link fence fit within the risk profile. And had the algorithm gone to market, it didn't go to market. Had the algorithm gone to market, it wouldn't have underwritten anybody's home with the chain link fence.
Well, what if I want to have this big, beautiful, expensive mansion, but I'm an idiot and throw a chain link around it, not a stone wall?
Well, in Florida, you have a lot of chain link fence.
All the time. Yeah.
I've seen those on very nice houses.
Right.
Well, the effect of this was when they dug in and had kind of open mind to, think about through the problem, was if you go to an inner city, what neighborhoods usually have a chain link fence?
Yes.
I mean, I lived in Philly. Everything had a chain link fence. Even the poorest parts of Philadelphia had more chain link than anything else.
Yeah. So the effect of this algorithm, which didn't go to market, is poor neighborhoods wouldn't have been able to be underwritten. So imagine
this is the chain link bias.
So then go ahead and imagine then if you're that's the neighborhood where you can afford a home. And so you can't get insurance on your home. So you can't actually buy your home. So then you're stuck renting. Then you're economically affected because buying a home is an avenue for wealth creation in America. And so you start to think about like what's the downstream effect sometimes of biases that can occur through this optimize for one outcome only and don't understand the why. Luckily this never got implemented, but like it stuck with me because it was such an interesting example of an unintended outcome when trying to solve like a pretty simple, basic problem with AI.
That's actually fabulous.
Yeah, I love that. What about, let's stay on this role of bias.
Yeah. So if we consider that bias then, is there a check that you use in your approach after learning this, after seeing this and experiencing this firsthand? This chain link bias, that's what we're going to call it. The CBB. Or CLB, sorry. I don't know what I'm talking about. And you talk about the downstream effects. How do you go back to then, before implementing models now, to look at what upstream could possibly create those downstream errors or biases? Do you have your own threshold? Do you have a process you take now to make sure that that chain link issue does not happen again?
So one is doing your best to have a diverse team, responsible for the AI solution. That's the first, which is a problem because often it's usually affluent white males who are
could afford expensive degrees, all that other stuff.
Exactly. It's overrepresented, but I think it's a responsibility of leaders to build diverse teams, not just like to say they have one, but the outcomes are better. It's better for everybody involved. And I also think that anybody in analytics or data science who's in a practitioner setting, especially who's going to market and affecting people directly through, products and services, has like a deep responsibility to understand these things and think about them, right? And this goes back to this theme of the conversation of what are we optimizing for? People in positions of decision power who are practitioners and implementing have a responsibility, I think, to optimize for the right thing and really be humble in understanding the why that got there. And that's just something that leaders have to do.
I'm just like, he's like a wall against
there's
David from earlier.
There's also, and I know you could speak to this because you brought this up earlier. There's this whole IOR, ROI based.
You're so dyslexic.
Are the shareholder value?
Yeah.
So there's what about external pressure put upon teams?
Have you felt or experienced that?
External pressure? Oh, absolutely. I mean, I work in public companies, and there's always pressure in a public company to produce results in a quarterly.
How about an outcome? Like, have you ever had that where they push you to a certain outcome? Yeah.
Not recently. I would say like the past 6 years of my career, I wanted to make sure I wasn't in the kind of setting where I was going to be pressured to compromise ethics in order to get results. Early in my career, I was in situations where to please a client, it's like, just make the numbers work.
Yeah.
And I know that didn't sit right with me, and I didn't want to ever do that. So
that's why I left private equity.
Because
I'm actually in there. I'm like, I can do some good. I can help people. And they're like, no, make the numbers look this way. And then they send that to a bank.
Right.
And then the bank underwrites that.
Right.
I'm like, this is not.
But the bank knows.
And the bank knows too.
Right. Yeah. They're all in it together.
Yeah, it's bad.
But everybody's incentive system relies on these numbers on a spreadsheet to look a certain way so that they get their payday in that system, right? So to answer your question, do I ever feel pressured? No. I actually seek out organizations where ethics is valued.
What would you say to a data scientist or maybe a chief technology officer, something like that, that is feeling pressure? What are some of the things that you've done? Because you seem to be very self-aware. So what are some that you've done in thinking process, especially with systems, to make sure that you're staying ethical?
At the end of the day, who you want to be. I mean,
fucking mic drop, dude.
Like at the end of the day, who do you want to be? It's
that's a mic drop.
You know, and it's hard to say because I think there's a lot of incentive and pressure to, again, optimize for yourself. There's a lot of cultural messaging around becoming obscenely wealthy, and that by pursuing your own selfish interests, that's actually what you should be doing, because again, there's messaging that in the end of the day, when we aggregate up, it's better for everybody through a whole bunch of interactions. So for people who do, you know, who feel that pressure and want to, you know, there's so many ways to make money if you're in data and analytics today, that the right fit is out there and you don't have to compromise your values.
I think that's incredible.
I think where you guys are at is where we were at probably 10 years ago on the digital marketing side.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like on the digital marketing side, no one knew what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so you had beginning of Facebook ads, you had Google ads kind of maturing. And so you could literally bullshit your way. You know, they would just hire you, pay you big money.
Right.
And and then you could throw an ad together and it could be nothing, but it would work because there wasn't a lot of competition on the systems.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, so you created, and I don't know if the same situation, I mean, I know there's requires a certain amount of education and stuff like that, but that report that's generated and given to someone, do you think bias comes from, the bias can't come from the AI as much as it's coming from a human with pressure?
Well, because the AI doesn't inherently
agnostic,
it's agnostic. It has no bias. It has no opinion. It doesn't give a shit.
Mm-mm.
You know, if you tell it, make the earth, you know, climate stable, it'd be like, okay, kill everybody. You know, it doesn't care.
It's Marvel Thanos.
Yeah,
He was a complete AI.
Yeah, he was all about it. And they also used that same approach with that other dude who was trying to blow up Tajikistan or whatever it was, right? So, the way I observe this system is that the AI doesn't have the bias.
Mm-hmm.
We just give it our bias.
Right. Through our construction of reality, through our incentives, through our go down the list, but we create it.
Yes.
What are some of the, if you don't mind, because I kind of, you brought Santa Fe Institute, and I've been hearing a lot of that lately.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's some controversial, I don't know if you want to use that word, maybe out of the box thinking. What are some of the things that you've learned from there? And what are,
yeah, you know, right? No, I think that, yeah, there is.
What are some of the things that you've learned there, you know, in praise to them, and some of the things that you're seeing that's going on there?
So I have not like worked with or, you know, formally researched with them. They have a great website called Complexity Explorer, which offers often free, really high quality education in all sorts of topics in complex systems and mathematics and dynamical systems analysis. So
anybody could go to that.
Anybody
Our listeners,
can go.
we're in 222
cool.
countries.
Yeah.
What was the website again?
ComplexityExplorer.com, I believe.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I've taken a few of those courses. And one of the researchers who I really appreciate is Scott E. Page. And he was really my introduction to complex systems from the beginning. He has a great course on Coursera called Model Thinking, which he's actually turned into a book called The Model Thinker. Mm. And he has another book called The Difference. And was the first time I was exposed to modeling as like constructing a set of interactions and, you know, using it to maybe model out like how humans decide, and are there tipping points in the system? Is it stable? And then getting into some of like the, you know, I would say the greatest hits of complex systems thinking, like cellular automata, and the basics for understanding that like individual interactions and small decisions can have outsized outcomes. That's what I learned from him. And so
I can't tell you. I mean, we've seen that firsthand.
Yeah.
Point in case. I'll just use myself as an example because I know it.
Mm-hmm.
I sat in a bathrobe and come up with this idea for TARTLE.
Mm-hmm.
Just me.
Yeah.
sitting around a bathrobe, and shared it with my co-founder. Lo and behold, you're in 222 countries with that idea.
Right.
The hell just happened? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I look back, I'm like, this is nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Santa Fe Institute, they're, I would say, like the epicenter of complex systems thinking. They, years ago collected a whole bunch of interesting minds here in Santa Fe who were thinking about problems in this way. And they continue. They do events in Santa Fe for the public. So, yeah, all sorts of interesting research. Controversial, I don't know. I actually don't know if it's controversial. Definitely outside the box, but I don't know of anything controversial.
And I'm curious. We met when I was holding a public event.
Mm-hmm.
What was your impression of the system at that time that was created here?
Which system?
TARTLE.
Oh, of TARTLE?
I'm interested just your view of it.
Think back.
Say whatever the hell you want on air too.
Yeah, I will. Let me think back. So when we met, at the time I was working on a lot of problems in the operations context of trying to understand individual kind of workflows and how a choice about maybe what work do you work on first affects maybe the whole chain of events. And one of the challenges I was sorting through at the time when we had met was a lot of that data was just aggregated, and it was really hard to individually identify whose data is this. And so I'm thinking back, and I'm jogging my brain, but what struck me was the ability to, instead of just be working with aggregate views of data, actually start to have a bottoms-up approach to data collection and ownership. That was one I remembered. So there was a connection I made to kind of a set of problems I was working on at the time. And then the second was the philosophy of kind of deconstructing the hierarchy and the centralization of data that's so valuable. Like if you take a look at the Fortune 500 today, it's all companies that have harnessed and won the winner-take-all strategy to data ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's, the wealthiest people in the world and the most powerful organizations in the world have taken everyone's data and done something with it. And I've never gotten paid by Facebook or anything else, And so the approach that you presented, which was let's invert this model, was really compelling to me.
It's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that as a third party. I think this has been incredible. And I would just ask, is there anything you would want to leave the world with to learn or resonate or ruminate on?
Take your curiosity seriously and see where it goes, and be humble and stick to it and see where you go, because that's where the creativity happens.
Creativity and tenacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool deal. Christian, thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, thank you guys. Appreciate it.